As you pointed out, Julio Jones is a pretty quiet person, right? Or I should say a relatively private person. He's not looking for attention, yet knowing that, you see him show up on FS1 yesterday and say what he said. When you saw that, what did you think?
Yeah, well, first of all, Jim, I am aware that you and I are live on air right now. I'm not entirely sure that Julio knew that yesterday, but when be that as it may, when I heard him say that and the way that he said that, and I've been reporting on this and talking with sources over the weekend about it. And so when I heard him say that, it wasn't like, oh my gosh, I'm done there. I don't want anything to do with Atlanta anymore. What it read to me as was, I know I'm out of there because we have been in constant communication. Julio Jones's agent is also the agent to Arthur Smith. There is a clear line of communication, multiple lines of communication. So Julio is very aware that Atlanta is trying to trade him, that they need to trade him in order to release some salary cap space. And so when I heard, oh, I'm out of there, it was more of, I understand this is a fait accompli, not I'm totally done with Atlanta and I never want to go back to the city again.
All right, so it's a really interesting response in the sense that you answered like 3 or 4 of my questions, but let me reset this. Jonathan Jones, my guest, you actually touched on something I wanted to ask you about. Do you think that he knew he was on the air?
Listen, I'm not sure one way or the other, but my educated guess, and after talking with a couple of folks down in Atlanta who did not know one way or the other, everyone said that it would have been out of character for Julio to have said what he said on air. This is not a guy who seeks to make off-season headlines. He doesn't seek to make in-season headlines outside of his play on the field. And I'm hard-pressed to remember a time that he went out of his way to allow an interview to take place outside of training camp. And so we didn't hear from him for most of the season because he was out with injuries, and I didn't anticipate that we would hear from him until he was mandated to speak to the media with his new team, whenever that may be. So I would be surprised, and people I spoke with who know Julio much better than I would be surprised if he knew that he was live on air.
I think you're right. I don't know if he knew or did not know, but it certainly was out of character. I was like, whoa. I mean, did he really just say that? And then the context of exactly what he said. So let's just go back to this really quickly. What's your sense of what's going on here? Like, is it the function of the team being in a bad cap spot and needing to trade him? Or is it about Julio knowing that that team might be in that spot and he wants to control it himself? Does he just want out? Like, why are we where we are with him?
I think we're here now because of the cap crunch that was brought on by the COVID-19 financial losses. If the cap had stayed static and had been around $210 million, the Falcons would still be in cap trouble, but they wouldn't need to get rid of a player who makes their team better. And that's what Julio does. The Falcons do not at all believe, number one, that they are going to be in tank or rebuild mode. I don't know if they necessarily view this as a championship window team like the previous regime did and tried to hold on to after that Super Bowl 51 run. But the reality is that they restructured Jake Matthews and Deion Jones and Matt Ryan, and that left Julio and Grady Jarrett. And they don't want to have to kick the can down the road on both of those guys. They want to free up space with one of them, and they would much rather free it up via a trade of Julio where they could get relief of $15 or so million rather than restructuring Grady and having to worry about it down the road. Now, the interesting thing here is how much leverage do the Atlanta Falcons have? They obviously need a competitive trade market in order to relieve that $15 million. And so they're probably going to get a second-round pick and maybe something else. A conditional fifth is what one executive said to me the other day. But what another team that's trading for Julio is definitely going to want to do is have Atlanta pay some of that salary. So will Atlanta have to pay $5 million of the 15 and still get $10 million in cap relief? I think that's the math that's going to have to be worked out between a competing team that winds up trading for Julio Jones.
Jonathan Jones joining us. All right, so that answers the question, what is the market for him? Maybe a second-round pick and something else. What then are some possible landing spots for him?
Yeah, so you have to look at places that have the salary cap space, right? And about a quarter of NFL teams have $15 million in salary cap space. But he's not going to the Jags. He's not going to the Lions. He wants to win. And so now you start looking at it, well, the Niners have the cap space. Are they going to execute the trade? Obviously, he could reunite with Kyle Shanahan. That would make plenty of sense. if the Broncos were to continue their pursuit of an Aaron Rodgers, for example, and in that pursuit, they then have to give the Green Bay Packers, let's say Jerry Jeudy, then that opens up a gigantic hole for a need for a top wide receiver. And I could see the Broncos with the cap space making that move, but that's a little outside, and a lot of things have to happen. I'd also look at the Titans, who would have to maneuver and massage the cap. But the fact is, if you were trading for a guy like Julio Jones, you are going to make sure that you can do whatever it needs to bring him on from a cap perspective. So I could see those teams. And then, of course, we heard from Aaron Rodgers yesterday, right? And if the Green Bay Packers want to continue to try to make it right to Rodgers, if they continue to want to hold the boombox outside of his window and let him know how desperate they are to have him, then they can trade a second-round pick for Julio, and maybe we'll see him back in the green and gold.
We are talking to Jonathan Jones. All right, you mentioned Aaron Rodgers and the fact that we heard from him. What do you make of what you heard from him yesterday, and does it feel like we're any closer to a resolution, or are we in the same spot that we've been for several weeks now or months between him and that team?
Yeah, I think we're mostly in the same spot. I would say that we really reached that fever pitch on draft day and draft night, of course, and really in the preceding days after. But, you know, I look at this Rodgers thing, and the drama has cooled. And he's sort of in his corner saying, you know, that very clearly has issues with management and very clearly has issues with the way in which he was not informed of the Jordan Love pick and everything else that has flown from that with a championship caliber team and not giving him, in his mind, the proper tools around him. Meanwhile, the Green Bay Packers are not picking up the phone if anyone's calling for Aaron Rodgers, and frankly, they don't have to right now. So right now, it seems, based off of his comments where he's not backing down, the Packers don't really have a reason right now to back down. This is going to go through June, probably into July, and then we're going to see once we get to training camp how long the Packers want to go with Blake Bortles and Jordan Love taking first-team snaps, and what is their stomach going to be for having an absence of Aaron Rodgers at camp?
So, exactly. So how do you think that plays out? I mean, do you expect him to be starting for Green Bay in week one, maybe with a new contract, or do you see him playing for somebody else?
You know, the longer this goes on without him landing somewhere else or without more drama, of course, you start to wonder, well, maybe it is going to happen. I know this. I know that everything that was reported there at the end of April was true and was how Aaron Rodgers felt. Maybe he's cooled off a little bit, but we do know that he is a legendary grudge holder. And so if he's still feeling this way today, which I would not at all put past him, then I think that we're in the exact same place as we were in April, pre-draft and during the draft. And I would say that it is unlikely that he is going to be the Green Bay Packers quarterback in week one. I would say it is still more likely than not that he is quarterbacking another team in 2021. And I still have the Denver Broncos at the top of that list.